Well, hello everyone and welcome from Isolation Central. Hope all you guys are going well today. To live the life of faith is the one thing God calls us to have. A faith seems such a simple thing to have, yet it turns out it is the hardest thing you will ever do in your life. Faith and sight are opposites. Disappointment or the death of a loved one can really challenge our faith. And to live by sight is to say, all there is what we can see, so live for that. But to live by faith says, no, there is more. There is something behind the scenes, which is why Hebrews 11:1 will describe faith by saying faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Well, we're up to the book of Esther in our scrolling series, and Esther is a book without any reference to God, which meant there was some debate as to whether it should even be included in the Bible. However, God's absence in Esther is very intentional. In Esther, God is hidden from the text to show that he is present in the events. So Esther may very well be exactly what you and I need to hear to keep going in the Christian life. So I'd like to spend most of our time today just retelling the story of Esther. Then after that, ask how is she going to help us to make it to heaven. Well, the story is set around 480 BC in Susa, which is today's Iran, where the Persian king Xerxes had his winter palace. Now, Persians were known for their extravagant parties, and Xerxes was the party king. He has a party to show off to all the leaders his realm, from India all the way to Ethiopia. How powerful he was, and the party went for 180 days. After this party, you know what he did? He gave another party, this time for everyone in the central business district, which lasted for 7 days. But all for the same purpose, to show everyone how much authority and power he had. Well, during this party, he actually made a law that everyone should eat and drink as much as they could. All you can eat a bar and a free bar tab as well for 7 days. When the king makes a law like that, it can't be cancelled. I don't think anyone was complaining about that law. But as you can imagine, after 7 days of all you can eat and all you can drink, he was, to say the least, high in spirits. People don't usually make good decisions when they are high in spirits. So on the 7th day, Xerxes called for his queen, Vashti, to be brought in wearing her crown for him to show off. And you can imagine being paraded before a hall of drunken men would be exactly what every girl hopes for in life. Not. So understandably, she refused. "Go tell the king," she proudly said, "that I am Persia's queen, and by his crowds of merry men I never will be seen." "Go back," she cried and waved her hand, and grief was in her eye. "Go tell the king," she sadly said, "that I would rather die." Well, the king was left in a very embarrassing position. He has been showing off his authority for 187 days, and one woman makes all that nothing by making a mockery of everything. The king expressed an alcohol-fueled rage, and his advisors were in panic. "This needs to be declared a national emergency," they said. "If this gets known everywhere, women all over the kingdom will hear about it, and they too will not do what their husbands tell them." So they suggested that the king depose Queen Vashti and make a law that will be made known everywhere that people will obey their husbands, that women will obey their husbands. The law they made succeeded in spreading the news everywhere. When Xerxes had sobered up a bit, he realised he missed his wife. So his advisors said, "Let's have a beauty competition and find you another wife." And this was probably the first known episode of The Bachelor. So all the king's horses and all the king's men went out to find the fairest in the land. There were plenty of beauties, but one stood out. Her name was Hadassah. This was her Jewish name, but which she kept secret. Her Persian name was Esther. She's described as having a lovely figure and beautiful. She was the pretty woman. She was also an orphan brought up by her uncle Mordecai, who is the first to have a genealogy mentioned about him. He is the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, which connects him directly to the first king of Israel, Saul. Of course, Esther was chosen as one of the girls to be in the running to replace Queen Vashti. But before these women could be paraded like a meat market before the king, they had to undergo a beauty treatment that lasted 12 months. 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. Sounds terrible. When the time came, the king had his series of one-night stands with all the girls to decide which he liked the best, and Esther pleased him most. So he chose Esther, and she became the queen of Persia. Of course, to mark the occasion, what did the king do? He threw a party and made it a public holiday. Now, Mordecai was never too far from the palace, keeping tabs on Esther. One time he just happened to overhear the palace guards plotting to kill the king. So he told Esther to tell the king this plot. It was investigated and proved true. The 2 guards were impaled on poles, and Mordecai got his name in the king's good books, which are called the Book of the Annals. Usually someone who got in the king's good books was honoured, but Mordecai seemed to miss out. Instead, we hear of a guy called Haman being honoured. Now, we don't know what it was for, but Haman is the second person to have their genealogy noted. He was the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. Now, this might not trigger anything for us, but for the first readers, they realised Haman's ancestors and Mordecai's ancestors had some unfinished business. Agag was king of the Amalekites, who King Saul was meant to put to death, but he spared him against the Lord's command. You can find that in 1 Samuel 15, which began Saul's downfall. The king elevated Haman, and everyone had to bow down to him, which Haman really liked. Everyone, that is, except Mordecai. He didn't bow down, and this made Haman really upset. Now Haman found out that Mordecai was a Jew and decided to not only have Mordecai killed, but all the Jews in Persia. Now the Persians were also into lucky numbers, so Haman threw a dice called a pur to determine when this massacre would happen. It was determined that it would happen in 11 months' time, in the month of Adar. Chapter 3 verse 8 says this, Then Haman said to King Xerxes, There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. And just like that, the word went out, like it did that all the wives should obey their husbands. Now the word has gone out that in 11 months' time, Persians are allowed to kill their Jewish neighbours, young and old, women and children, and to take their belongings. When Mordecai the Jew heard about this, he clothed himself in sackcloth and ashes, wailing loudly and bitterly, but he did not go near the palace because sad people were not allowed near the king. Jews in every province did the same thing. It's not every day you learn that your whole people have only 11 months to live. Esther found out through one of her servants why Mordecai was grieving. Mordecai sent a message to Esther instructing her to go to the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Remember, the king does not yet know Esther was a Jew. Esther said, If the king summons you and you don't come, you're in big trouble. Remember Vashti? But if you go to the king without being summoned, you will be killed, unless the king raises his scepter and lets you speak. The king hasn't summoned me for 30 days, so I don't like my chances, she said. Then comes the theological turning point and famous part of the story. It says this, When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Well, after the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes like a battle suit and stood at the door of the king. The king saw her and raised his scepter and welcomed her. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given you." "If it pleases the king," Esther replied, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet, a party I have prepared for him." Now the king can't resist a party, and he was curious as to what Esther wanted. So at the party he asked again, "Now what is your petition?" "It will be given you." "And what is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." She said, "My request is that you and Haman come to another party tomorrow, and I'll tell you what I want." Well, Haman can't believe his luck. 2 parties in a row with the queen. He thought, she must really like me. Haman went home a pretty happy boy. But as he walked home, who did he pass? Mordecai, who continued to refuse to bow to him. Haman was enraged at this again. It spoiled his whole day. So Haman called together his wife and friends and boasted to them about everything he had, wealth and honour. He even boasted to his wife about how many sons he had. I'm pretty sure she was there, but anyway. All this was nothing because Mordecai was a fly in the ointment. Mordecai was spoiling everything. So Haman's wife makes the suggestion, verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 25 metres. Everyone will be able to see it. Then ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." Well, this suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Haman would sleep really, really well that night, and first thing in the morning, he would go to the king's palace and arrange Mordecai's elevation. Now, it just happened that night that the king did not sleep really well. So he ordered the good books to be read to him, and he heard again the story of Mordecai foiling the plot to assassinate the king. Now Xerxes asked, "What did we do for Mordecai?" And his officers said, "Nothing was done." He said, "How can we honour him? Who's got an idea?" Now, by this time it was early in the morning, and Haman had just arrived, and the attendant said, "Haman's just happens to be here. Why don't you ask him?" When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man that the king delights to honour?" Well, again, Haman could not believe his luck. The king is surely talking about me, he thought. So Haman said, "You should put your royal robes on that man and put him up on your royal horse and put a crown on the horse as well, and then get the king's most trusted servant to walk around the city, tell everyone to honour this great person." The king said, "What a great idea." The king said, "Go at once and get the horse." And Haman said, "Yeah." "And the robes." And Haman said, "Yeah." "And the crown." And Haman said, "Yeah." "And do that for Mordecai the Jew." What? So Haman elevated Mordecai onto the horse and paraded him before everyone. Well, you could imagine how upset Haman was. Poor Haman. He ran home and told his wife and his friends, who very encouragingly, his wife said, things aren't looking too good for you. While she was saying this, Xerxes' servants arrived and hurried him to Queen Esther's second party. The king asked again, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. And Queen Esther made her request and reveals she is a Jew. She says, if I have found favour with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Well, the king, hearing this, someone wants to kill his queen. Who could this be? Who is the man who threatens the life of the queen, he says. Well, you could imagine the blood drained out of Haman's face. Esther said, there is the man. He's sitting beside you. Haman would have said, what have I done? The king stormed out, enraged, looking for a reason and a way to kill Haman. Haman realised he was a goner and begged Queen Esther to save him and threw himself where she reclined. But at that moment the king came back in and thought Haman was trying to molest the queen. What's a just punishment for this? Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching the height of 25 metres stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. What Haman set up for Mordecai would now be turned on Haman. But the story's not over. The slaughter of the Jews was still due to happen, and the law couldn't be repealed, but another law could be made. So a law was made that the Jews could fight back. People could see the tables were turning in the favour of the Jews, and chapter 8 verse 17 says, and many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. It was like an evangelistic mission was going on. When the 11 months had passed, the day came for the battle, and some Persians thought they could get the upper hand, but they were defeated, and even the 10 sons of Haman followed their dad and were impaled. Although the Jews were allowed to take the plunder, they did not do it. They left it all. What happened in the city also happened in the provinces. What did the Jews do to celebrate? Well, they had the party of Purim, established as a yearly feast, which is still celebrated today. Now remember, the pur, out of Purim, was the dice that Haman threw to determine when the slaughter would be. So the party was called Purim, because with God nothing is left to chance, and he works out everything for the good of his people. Proverbs 16 verse 33 says, we may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. And a letter went out to all the 127 provinces. At the beginning of the story, the message went out of how great Xerxes was, and in the end now everything turns around, and the letter went out, how great is God. Well, there's the story. What do we make of it today? There are a number of reflections which I'd really love to work out with you on the drill down this Wednesday night on YouTube, so check that out if that's something you'd like to do. But today, just one reflection, I think. You see, Israel had a promise from God that they would endure. At that time, it felt like God was absent, but he wasn't. He was behind the scenes. And what looked like disaster, God turned the tables for his good. Think of the people looking at Jesus as Jesus hung on the cross. Everyone was saying, he's a goner. And Satan, who has regularly been associated with Haman, thought, I've got him. And the religious leaders thought, we've got him. Acts chapter 2 verse 23 says, this man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. What no one could see was that God was working in the background, and would turn the tables and raise Jesus to life. Now, if God kept his word about Jesus' resurrection, he will keep his word about his return. You can believe it. Now, in Esther, God is hidden from the text to show he is present in the events. And even the Hebrew form of the name Esther has the Hebrew word hide in it. Whatever we go through, God is present, behind the events of life, working out his purposes for the world and your life. Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for the good. 1 Peter 1:8 says, though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. So friends, keep living the life of faith. As hard as it gets, God is trustworthy. Amen?